So we're back to the second day of our conference, and so this talk will be in English, and then I hope those who are online also can hear us. So today this morning, we have Father Patrick Yanapragas, and then so he's professor and formerly head of the Department of Christian Studies in the University of Madras. And this is one of the places where in a public university we have a center for Christianity. And so as you know, in the Indian system, like when in the university we have mostly only the graduate students in the university, and then we have colleges where we have undergraduate programs. So basically he has been leading that institute, and then also have many graduate students. I'm a graduated from that, and himself is also mostly working on public theology, how theology interacts with the rest of the society. And during our talk around, and then our chat around, so I think it's very important to realize, like in Taiwan, we have the Catholic Church. Itself is a very powerful institution in the sense of like how it can influence various issues that are happening in this country. And somehow I feel that we can do a lot more. And these particular interactions also help us to how to interact with the local communities and local government. And yesterday we had Father B talks about like how Pope Francis sort of calls us to sort of politically getting involved in the society. I mean, it's not against, or it's not that Catholic Church should not get politically involved, but it has its own way of doing it, and then its own way of engaging it. So today we are very happy to have Father Patrick, and then his topic today is civic communitarianism and the Catholic social teaching and Indian appreciation. So please put your hands together to welcome Father Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor John, for the words of welcome. Thanks also for organizing this very good and relevant event and inviting all of us to be part of it. It's a good opportunity for us to think together, test our ideas, and move forward. My topic, as you heard, is civic communitarianism and the Catholic social teaching. Because Father Bede has already spoken about political theology, so that actually has intoned or initiated this direction of thinking. As Professor John said, I am working in a public university, which is a rare opportunity in the Indian context. So my attention also is towards the public, how the church can be present meaningfully in the public, especially in a minority context. Of course, like Taiwan, in the Indian context, we are only 2.34% officially. Unofficially, it could be something like 3.5%. So we are a big nation, you know that, 1.42 billion people with over 1,600 cultural universes and about 368 languages, and official languages are 22. So we are a very diverse nation, and how the Catholic Church, a small minority, can be present there meaningfully is the quest of my general research. Now, when Professor John asked us to, give a topic in the context of various events, COVID being one, and of course the other milestones in the Catholic Church, like Pope Francis X, etc., what came to my mind is to look at the Indian context in the post-pandemic phase, wherein we find that there is a lack of what I call civic structure of care. Civic structure of care. In fact, India did well to overcome the pandemic in a relatively better manner, or with relative success, with the support of the NGOs. Oh yeah, okay. With the support of the NGOs. They were very much helpful in helping people as individuals or as groups. They were there. So, but for them, probably the Indian government would not have overcome the pandemic in the manner in which it has overcome. So, their contribution was certainly very significant. But however, there was something lacking in their whole approach, because it was more ad hoc, born out of immediate sympathy or even empathy. And they tended to be more kind of fragmented, personal and fragmented, you know. Especially in the Indian context where the community is deeply divided on the basis of caste, which is a unique or a singular phenomenon to India. Things remain more fragmented, or the outreach of the care remains fragmented. Including now the issue that is emerging in a big way, which is called religious communalism, the power of the rightist forces. So even they also cause some kind of fissures into the structure of care. Let us say into the practice of care. Perhaps there isn't a structure of care evolved. Even Pope Francis, in his book on post-pandemic world, would speak about a structure of care that is necessary, isn't it? A structure of care which can be present in a particular context, in a given context, and people can be helped in an invisible but a fine manner with a sense of human dignity and care for the other. So that is actually lacking in the Indian context. So therefore I was thinking, how can we think of a situation where this care is present or cultivated, and where, say, the Catholic social teaching can also play a role in cultivating or in kind of bringing to birth that structure of care. That is my concern. Therefore, I looked into the various political philosophies that are present in the contemporary context, which, say, are actually getting transformed in a big way, especially in the Western context. There is a perceivable shift from a liberal approach to human rights, approach to common good and things like that, to a communitarian approach, Because liberalism has kind of, got quote unquote saturated to some extent. Therefore, the Western scholars are thinking today about a communitarian approach, which basically holds that an individual is constituted by a community. Individual is constituted by a community. So therefore, communitarian dimension is very important. So I thought it's fine. But then there is another issue when I approach, from the perspective of communitarianism, the Indian context. You find the emergence of what is called authoritarian communitarianism in India. Authoritarian communitarianism, or what we call the ascriptive hierarchical communitarianism based on caste. We find that being present. So how do we then meaningfully relate communitarianism to the Indian context is the next question, to which I thought, taking cue from some public theologians like David Hollenbach in the United States and several others who have been speaking about, say, a synthesis between liberalism and communitarianism, which is necessary today, which could be named as civic communitarianism. Civic communitarianism. So it gives a role for the civil society to cultivate a sense of care, and that can become a structure of care in any given context. So that's how I came to this topic. This has gone back. Oh yes, that's the introduction. Yeah. So those of you who followed the text in the book, the page starts from 125. So therefore I searched the Catholic social teaching to ground my argument, or ground my argument for the importance of the civil society, to look at the way the Catholic Church has approached the civil society in history, in terms of the content, in terms of different modes of approaching. And you all must be aware that the Catholic Church has had a kind of say, what we call restricted approach in the past, and it has opened up progressively now. Restricted meaning, you know that Pope Pius IX had that syllabus of error when he said the civil sphere or the civic government is more oppressive. We cannot, approach it, or we cannot participate in that. So that was an antagonistic approach to the civil sphere. But from there, we have moved a long way. I mean, we have shifted. So we have progressively opened up, Leo XIII opened it up gradually, and others still more. But when it came to John Paul II, we have opened it up in a very big way, in a very significant way. So in page 133, you find the last paragraph. Pope John Paul II was the first to integrate clearly in his documents the present-day understanding of civil society. The Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, published during his later years, reflects clearly the present-day understanding of civil society as the third sector between the state and the market. It says, civil society is the sum of relationships and resources, culture and associative, that are relatively independent from the public sphere and the economic sector, and speaks of its role as providing space for the expression of the planning capacity of human beings to work individually or through associations for the common good by fostering a freer and more just social life. It also cautions about the risk of this space being dominated over by the stronger who prevail over the weaker. The Compendium serves as a good guide, not merely on the very understanding of civil society, but also on the kind of relationships that needs to exist between the church and civil society based on the principles of solidarity and cooperation for common good on the one hand, and between the civil society and the political society, that is the state, based on the principle of subsidiarity on the other. It makes a strong case that it is the responsibility of the state to ensure the freedom of religion, which is one of the sublime freedoms to be exercised in civil society. Pope Benedict XVI, as mentioned above, articulated the Christian responsibility to build up the civil sphere, building a just social and civil order wherein each person receives what is his or her due is an essential task which every generation must take up anew. In the context of speaking about applying the principles of distributive justice to the economic domain, he advised the developed countries to grant economic aid to underdeveloped countries. Herein, he took care to mention that in the distribution of aid, the receiving governments should also involve the bearers of cultures within civil society, including local churches. So that's how he finds a place for the church in the civil society. Today, Pope Francis open-mindedly embraces the role of civil society in his vision for the participatory church, the synodal church. He relates its role to some of its pressing concerns, like that of the ecological crisis, issues of migrants and refugees, misery of the poor, etc. He attributes the present-day eco-crisis and tragedies suffered by the poor to lack of cultivation in civil society of human responsibility and solidarity to one another and to the nature. He speaks similarly about the condition of migrants. At present, he says, migration is affected by the loss of that sense of responsibility for our brothers and sisters on which every civil society is based. He desires the civil society institutions to cultivate these foundations even while working for common good beyond the pursuit of economic profit and efficient system. What we need, in fact, are states and civil institutions that are present and active, that look beyond the free and efficient working of certain economic, political, or ideological systems and are primarily concerned with individuals and the common good. Going further, he wants the virtues of citizenship to be cultivated in civil society. He envisions a substantive role to be played by the institutions or organizations of civil society under the principle of subsidiarity in any given political system. And true to the Catholic faith, he wants a public role for religion, which Father Bede had finally emphasized yesterday, in a spirit of solidarity to shape up the institutions of civil society. Pope Francis' passionate plea, as found in his documents, to participate in institutions of civil society for the common good, and his efforts at meeting with different political leaders to mediate peace, contribute significantly to a Catholic culture of engaging the civil society. As Raphael Ruggiani states, Francis assumes these efforts by supporting social and civil movements because these movements collaborate to build a more inclusive and just society. His papacy, inspired by a Latin American ecclesial and theological identity, is a testimony of how secular society and religious institutions can join forces for the common good of all people based on an ethics of democratic citizenship, ecclesial synodality, and social participation. Thus we see that the Catholic Church has progressively opened up to the civil society. From being the one which either antagonized, imposed itself upon, or patronized the civil society, the Catholic Church has come to congenially participate in civil society along with different others. While doing so, it has come to realize the value of some of the cornerstones of the civil society, like human dignity, freedom, religious freedom, subsidiarity, solidarity, and common good. The next portion on the cornerstones of civil society, which have been already dwelt in terms of the human rights and common good. So I move on to the next section on the proposal of civil friendship in the ambience of civilization of love. The Catholic social teachings, especially in the Compendium and the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, speak about creating a civilization of love. The Compendium says, social life becomes more human the more it is characterized by efforts to bring about a more mature awareness of the ideal towards which it should be oriented, which is the civilization of love. The Compendium further observes, a community has solid foundations when it tends towards the integral promotion of the person and of the common good. Creating a civilization of love is an invitation to build a civic community based on the liberal values of freedom and rights on the one hand, and of common good, solidarity and fraternity on the other. As the Catholic social teaching has dwelt upon it on many occasions, and as Jacques Maritain, a well-known philosopher you all know, has proposed in his writings, a person is more than an individual, which has, I think, already been dealt in some of the papers yesterday. While an individual is understood in a modern framework in terms of an aggregation of traits and merits, endowed with freedom and rights, a human person is a wholesome self that integrates the material dimensions with the spiritual dimensions, which nurture the transcendental openness of the human. A person is a gift to be encountered in a context of social life with a measure of love than to be treated in a calculative manner. Similarly, a community is a relational space for encounter of persons rather than an aggregate of individuals. Such a community matures when it engages in relationality, interactions, dialogues, networks, and structures that foster common good. Collective goals perceived in egalitarian participation of human persons as individuals and groups nourish the bonds of civil friendship. By civil friendship, the Compendium means the most genuine actualization of the principle of fraternity, which is inseparable from that of freedom and equality. Civic friendship ties together liberal values of freedom and equality with communitarian virtue of fraternity, a virtue that Pope Francis yearns for in our times. As he laments, today we lost the taste of fraternity in spite of gorging ourselves into networking. These are the very words that he uses, gorging into networking. We have become prisoners of virtual reality, but lost the taste and flavor of the truly real. To overcome these systemic forms of isolation, fraternity and common good are the signposts to navigate our life. As Michael Coulter observes, civil friendship is an activity that must be learned and practiced, and the Church can play a great role in teaching these duties and helping its faithful acquire the habits of civil friendship. Indian Catholic Church would do well to commit itself to developing this civil friendship in the wider Indian society through civic forums and public institutions. The major obstacle to civil friendship in India is the presence of unmeaning hierarchies and discrimination based on caste, as I said at the beginning, and the consequent brokenness of social life. It needs a concerted and sustained intervention to weaken such obstacles of inequality and discriminatory practices. As elsewhere, the Indian Catholic Church is a major player in the sphere of education, and the opportunity can be meaningfully lived out. With its resources in the public domain, it can embark upon a new era of forging civic friendship with the civic modes of dialogue. Now, Dialogue has been dealt with by the CST as well as by different organizations of the Catholic Church for a long time. What comes very something new and unique in the present day context is Pope Francis' emphasis on a culture of encounter and dialogues. Pope Francis identifies as well as promotes a culture of encounter in the present day globalized context of thick plurality and high interdependence in cultural, economic, political and social relationship. It is a culture which privileges dialogue as a form of encounter. He speaks about three forms of, or three areas of dialogue, which also has been already mentioned. So I move on to the next paragraph. An image that the Pope uses to capture the nature of this dialogical encounter is polyhedron. That you must have heard, polyhedron. It stands for an encounter that brings together different others with their own unique features and radical differences, compared to a sphere where different points gain their value in terms of their relationship to perceived center. In a polyhedron, every point obtains value in terms of its unique potential, resources and context. The Pope explains, the image of a polyhedron can represent a society where differences coexist, complementing, enriching and reciprocally illuminating one another, even amid disagreements and reservation. Each of us can learn something from others. No one is useless or no one is expendable. This also means finding ways to include those on the peripheries of life. For they have another way of looking at things. They see aspects of reality that are invisible to the centers of power where weighty decisions are made. In this polyhedral vision, differences are not obstacles but creative elements for progress. In his words, differences are creative, they create tension, and in the resolution of tension lies humanity's progress, which we also discussed yesterday in, I think, informal settings. In encouraging dialogue, Pope Francis is not beginning a new tradition. Dialogue has been promoted in the Catholic Church for a long time. For example, the short Vatican II document Nostra Aetate speaks about dialogues and collaboration with peoples of other religions. Gaudium et Spes advocates brotherly love to cultivate interpersonal relationship in the context of increasing individualism. And Pope Paul VI, Populorum Progressio, views sincere dialogue to create brotherly love as the mark of progress and development. John Paul II discusses the dialogue between faith and reason, and Benedict XVI speaks of truth, logos, that create dialogos for communication and communion. However, there are elements that distinguish Pope Francis from the previous teachings on dialogue. First of all, he widens the horizons of dialogue from the usual religious or cultural realms to social, political, economic, ecological, and educational arenas. The impressive list of levels and fields he brings into the ambit of dialogue marks him out. In Laudato Si, he discusses dialogues at international, national, and local level that bring together the fields of politics, economics, religion, and the sciences. These diverse fields and levels of encounter tell us how every moment of our life is dialogical. They illuminate the richness, spiritual depth, creative potential, and religious visions of the life of dialogue. Secondly, he differentiates himself in proposing dialogues that are more dynamic, contemporaneous, and open-ended, as distinct from those proposed by the philosopher Pope John Paul II and the theologian Pope Benedict XVI. Pope John Paul II, while proposing dialogue between faith and reason, sees philosophic thought as often the only ground for understanding and dialogue with those who do not share our faith. Benedict XVI, reflecting on love in truth, dwells upon the theme of truth enlightening love, wherein truth, the logos, analogous to Jesus Christ, revealed logos, creates dialogos, hence communication and communion. While the former focuses on the philosophic thought, the latter sees the truth, the logos, as the basic framework for dialogue. Pope Francis understands dialogues in terms of the ongoing reality of encounter. That is something special. For him, truth is dynamic, emerging through experiences of dialogue, mutual relationships, and creative initiatives. Together, we can seek the truth in dialogue, says Pope Francis. Thirdly, Pope Francis brings in more passionately the poor, the marginalized, and the victims of exploitation, including the earth, to be partners in dialogue. For him, dialogue obtains its primary significance if done with the poor and the marginalized. His words are instructive. He says, if we wish to dialogue, we should do this in the first place with the poor. They are not just another party to be won over or merely another individual seated at a table of equals. They are our principal dialogue partners, those from whom we have the most to learn, to whom we need to listen out of a duty of justice, and from whom we must ask permission before presenting our proposals. That's something wonderful. Fine words. We must seek permission before presenting our proposals, even to the poor, something very, very sublime. Their words, their hopes, and their fears should be the most authoritative voice at any table of dialogue. Bringing the poor to the center of dialogical life is very pertinent to our pandemic vulnerable world. Making the poor, their hopes and fears, the validating concerns of dialogues takes us on a path of cultivating responsibility and care for the vulnerable. It is not that the poor become objects of sympathy, but a source of hope and resilience. Now, I would like to apply this to the Indian context, of course in a very broad way, but with specific suggestions. Indian context. Yeah. Okay. It is going up and down. Yeah. Yeah. The dialogical method of cultivating fraternity, solidarity, and own good, emphasized very much by the more recent Catholic social teachings, especially those of Pope Francis, inspires newer visions even while bringing up fresh challenges in an Indian context of civil society. The way the Pope widens the arenas of dialogues from religion and culture to social, political, economic, and educational arenas, and that too in a polyhedral model, not merely captures a wider reality of life, but also gives a civic orientation to dialogue. Indian Christianity, especially the Catholic Christianity, has been involved for over 5 centuries in different forms of dialogues known as adaptation, enculturation, indigenization, Indianization, and so on, to contextualize the Christian message in the Indian soil. Robert de Nobili was one of the pioneers, on par with or along with Matteo Ricci here in China, undertaking various methods of adaptation. These initiatives are also attempts at inspiring others to appreciate the truth of Christianity. As Ecclesia in Asia points out, Asia is the cradle of the major religions of the world, including Christianity, and that there are among the people an abiding spiritual quest and a deep-seated yearning to search after the truth. Dialogues, not as instruments, but as the very way of life, enable Christians to engage with this quest and yearning, even while bearing witness to its own truth. The social teachings of CBCI, Catholic Bishop Conference of India, even by 2004, had articulated four major areas of dialogue, as dialogue with cultures, with religions, with ideologies, and with the poor and the marginalized, and encouraged its faithful to implement them. These initiatives and attempts have indeed borne fruits, however small may be their visibility amidst a sea of humanity with their innumerable faith traditions. The many dialogue centers, personalities, and journals dedicated to this cause continue to nourish abilities for mutual learning. However, today they have, unwittingly though, stirred a new challenge in the context of the Hindutva mobilization or radicalization. Hindutva is actually the rightist communalist ideology. It cannot be equated with Hinduism. Hinduism is considered as the religion of the majority, but Hindutva is actually an ideological mobilization of religion, political mobilization of religion. Now, in this context, a suspicion has been created on the Christian involvements in dialogue. A suspicion has been created. That is a new experience today in India. So, initiatives under this banner are seen as invidious attempts at converting the other into the Christian fold. The suspicion keeps spawning antagonism towards the very practice of dialogue itself. In this context, the broad basing of dialogues, integrating even economic and political aspects of life and reorienting them in a polyhedral model or modes, opens up civic avenues for interaction with others for the sake of common good. The encyclical Ecclesia in Asia, even while appreciating the religious creativity of Asian people and even recognizing the soteriological character of their tradition, speaks of the need of bringing to birth a civilization of love by cultivating the values of human freedom, dignity and rights, along with solidarity and common good. The Indian Catholic Church has been living out its social concern by undertaking huge projects of poverty alleviation, disaster management, establishing units of healthcare, literacy campaigns, developmental initiatives, and national integration programs. It is time now that the Church entered the civic space by improving upon conversational abilities and resources to work in solidarity with others for common good. Conversation, as you may know, is a privileged kind of a practice in the context of undertaking public theology, doing public theology. So it is slightly different from the mode of dialogue as such, wherein we still have our own positions and then we want to kind of, accept, we want the other to accept our position. There is an underlying or latent wish to kind of give our point to the other. Conversations are open-ended. We allow God to work. We converse with one another in the fine way possible. We learn each other's traditions and we converse with them, and we allow God, the Holy Spirit, to work. So this is conversation in the public sense, or in the sense of public theology. The Catholic social teachings, as seen above, have come today to give importance to community, fraternity, solidarity, and common good. This goes with the long-standing emphasis on human dignity, freedom, autonomy, and rights. Indeed, both these sets of values are being integrated in a civilization of love, ultimately springing from our deep faith in a transcendent Creator God. This fundamental import or vision of the CST, premised upon the philosophical theology of natural law, has potentials to converge with the similar visions like the religio-ethical vision of Dharma in the Indian context. A few words about Dharma. In India, regardless of region and tradition, you hear this word Dharma resounding everywhere, you know. At the popular level, at the philosophical level, at the governmental level, people speak about Dharma. So, Dharma is today being propagated as the overarching vision to support public policies, political power, governance, and even individual and family lives in the Indian context. Dharma, an ancient concept of Indian traditions, initially stood for a universal cosmic and moral order. But unfortunately, it became a resource to build up a Varna Dharma that is discriminatory, divisive, authoritarian, and oppressive. Varna Dharma, typically spoken about in Vedas, one of the earliest, documents or religious kind of philosophical documents. They categorize people under four. Varna typically means color. That is the literal meaning of Varna. But then it also goes into what we call ritual purity and pollution in classifying people. You must have heard about the four basic Varnas: the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras. But majority of the working class people are below these four categories. They are called the untouchables, the so-called untouchables, you see. Anyway, now the Varna Dharma became a lopsided ethical and religious ground to trample upon the human dignity and rights of people treated as low caste and depressed classes for many centuries. In the present day revival of the concept, one finds also the presence of concerted ambiguities which make the concept Janus-faced. In this context, it would do well that the vision of CST dialogues with Dharma so as to redeem the latter's positive potentials to build up a civic community based on the universal values of human rights and duties. Similarly, it would do well that the CST strengthens its bearings on the communitarian dimension by its dialogue with the vision of Dharma. A fruitful public conversation between CST and Dharma would be in the right direction. Today, some of the Western political theoreticians today, for example, Amitai Etzioni, who kind of understands the different spheres, or meaning the West more towards individual freedom and human rights and things like that, and the West still with communities, including spiritual orientation emergent over the centuries. We, in fact, perhaps cannot classify so neatly like that. Every region has both the dimensions, but certainly some are outstanding over the other. Yeah. Some are outstanding over the others. So it is time that we bring about a synthesis between these two orientations. One liberal, the other communitarian. So in the East we have more and more of communitarian ideologies or political philosophies, and in the West we have more and more of the liberal. Perhaps we need to bring about a synthesis, and my suggestion is that CST can play a good role in bringing about that synthesis. As conclusion, among the many vulnerabilities exposed by the pandemic COVID-19, the lack of a civic structure of care makes India yet more vulnerable. It bodes ill for facing up to future catastrophes of similar nature. While thinking of constructing a civic structure of care, one finds meaningful the present-day endeavors of forging synthesis between the liberal and the communitarian political principles of human dignity and common good. They seek to nurture the bonds of civil society upon the indices of human rights, citizenship, equality, liberty, fraternity, solidarity, participation and common good on a communitarian liberal framework. In this regard, the Catholic social teaching stands out as a potent corpus that can be resourced to cultivate the values of this synthesis. The corpus has been engaging with civil society in a progressively open-minded manner, and it has come today to envisage the civil society as the main arena for addressing the major common concerns today. It seeks to develop a civilization of love constituted by civil friendship, wherein human freedom and dignity, premised on the transcendental orientation of humanity, are integrated with virtues of solidarity, fraternity, and common good, resourced from the Christian faith community. As a method of developing these virtues, the corpus has come to dwell elaborately today upon the dialogical modes of a culture of encounter. The Catholic Church in India would do well to converse in public with other Indian missions of moral good to strengthen the bonds of civil society and come up with a civic structure of care. Thank you.
Thank you Patrick, for the presentation on how Catholic social teaching can create a civil communitarianism, as well as especially in the Indian context of it. And we have 20 minutes for the questions in a way, so it's sort of a discussion. So if anyone has got any questions, you can be in English or Chinese, we can do that. And for the beat.
Thank you so much. I'm Bede Okwuije, Professor of Theology at the Duquesne University, Pittsburgh, USA. Father Patrick, I was thrilled by your presentation. This way of trying to, in a way, kind of find a third way between liberalism and authoritative communitarism. And then you do it by trying to create way for the agency of the civic society. And then also now articulated together with the resources of the Catholic social teachings. I really appreciated how you used the civilization of love, civil friendship. So you want to build on the liberal values of freedom and rights on the one hand, and the common good, solidarity, fraternity. So I like that. And I was expecting that you will go into the issue of caste in India, and you did it. Now, I would like to hear more about that. What resources and what courage do the Christian communities have to dismantle the caste system in India? I remember listening to Archbishop Fitzgerald, who was in the Dicastery for Interreligious Dialogue in Rome, and he was asked this question, and he said, anyway, the day a Dalit comes to marry my sister, then that day I will know whether I'm a Christian or not. So what resources do the Christian communities have really to dismantle this caste system and propose genuine social friendship and equality? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and appreciation. I think you have identified the real issue that is there in the Indian context, especially when we make efforts to create a civil society or create a civic structure of care. Caste, of course, comes as the major hurdle. Now, as you rightly pointed out, caste finally is rooted in this exclusionary and inclusionary activity, by excluding some people from marriage bonds and including some, you know. And in that, religion also plays a role. It is not just a social system. It is of course social, but then legitimated or it is strengthened by religious legitimation or teaching. Now, this nexus between religion and social pattern or social structure has lived on for so many centuries. Some religions took on this or kind of confronted this nexus. Christianity was one among them. Of course, Islam initially did that, but then it did not go so elaborately into challenging the caste system, though the appeal of brotherhood and equality has actually attracted some people. But Christianity had a more, say, conscious attempt, it is not by the fact of being a religion, but then also theologically, Christianity had opposed the discriminatory practices of caste, especially based on the religious idea of purity and pollution. Christianity had done that. Now, Indian Christianity, as elsewhere, is constituted by Catholic Church, which is the predominant one, and then the Protestant churches, mainly Protestant churches, and then now recently the Pentecostal churches. Each church deals with this caste issue, especially its stronghold of purity and pollution, in a differential manner. Though, in general, Indian Christianity has done well to challenge the caste system in a very broad-based manner. You see, certainly, what we call the way Indian Christianity has given in to some extent to caste is not equal to the way other religions in the Indian religions have given into caste system. By which I am implying that there is also caste practice in the Indian Christianity. That is the real issue. Though this cannot be just equated with other religious traditions. There is a slight difference, meaning a sense of equality, sense of human personhood and rights is there in the Indian Christian whole. However, it is not to the extent that we would desire. No, you pointed out to the right practice of whether you would marry a person, from a Dalit background. When it comes to that, Indian Christianity is still lagging behind. It organizes, or the marriage bonds are still along the caste lines, predominantly along caste lines, even within Indian Christianity. So, it is kind of what we call, yes, we have gone ahead, still we are held back. That kind of a situation when it comes to caste and Indian Christianity. Now, in this context, I would like to point out, of course, we must also take a look beyond ourselves, meaning beyond the Catholic approach to caste system. The recent, what we call Pentecostal churches, they seem to strike at the issue in a very pointed manner, Of course, they would say, if you are in Christ, that's enough. Whether you are of this caste or that caste, it is enough that you are in Christ, so we will marry. You see, so it is already a step forward. I would say, some of my students were also from Pentecostal background, and I know how they intermarried, meaning inter-caste marriages among them. But once again, there is a pullback. Even there, they seem to now organize. Now, in the recent past, they seem to organize Pentecostal churches along under the leadership of certain caste leaders. I mean, the Pentecostal pastors have their own caste, and caste communities segregate around, or come around them in the churches. You see, so which means This caste is a proverbial python. You know, you strike it several times, you think that it is dead, but it comes back again and again. That is the issue. But to be realistic, we must reckon the degree to which each religion has overcome the caste discrimination. Some are very, very tangibly and openly casteist. They would also, practice even in other civic matters, you see. So recently, if you had taken a look at some of the papers, what we call honor, titles of honor or symbols of honor, they are tightly held by the so-called high caste. And I think last week there was an incident reported in one of the North Indian states that a gentleman, bridegroom, was riding on a horse to go for his marriage, and some caste youths, they attacked him. How could you use a horse to go? That is our prerogative, our right. How can you do it? That kind of unmeaning things in civic matters is also present even now. The Dalits and other people are not allowed to enter into the common, what we call pathways, roads, and draw water from wells, are even now being practiced. So, at this level, I think Christians fare better. There is some kind of a civic sense there, but not to the extent of really marrying across caste. We would only wish that in future it takes place. If the Christians and if there is a civil society, a strong civil society put in place with the help of different agencies, including religious agencies, I'm sure things will improve for the better. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah. 等一下，我需要翻译。那个，请问老师，我们的弟兄圣公会的弟兄，他们对于我们的社会教导，或者是印度的种姓制度，他们的态度如何？
圣公会对。What's more? Yes. Basically asking about the
Anglican Church.
Okay.
Yeah. What is their response in terms of for this 种姓制度那个嘛？
in terms of caste.
那 caste. Yeah.
Okay.
Anglican Church.
Okay.
Anglican Church came with the British, as the British came to India, Anglican Church came. They had the High Church, and they had also the Low Church, Now, that was only one denomination among the Protestant churches. So, I think I can speak about the approach of Protestant churches in general, which is appreciable, which is markedly different from the Catholic Church. Catholic Church has been there from, of course, 2000 years. The Syrian Christian community has been there, but that had become part and parcel of the caste system of that area. From the 16th century, when the Portuguese came, Catholic Church had a difference in terms of the caste system, but then, it had also to some extent given in. But during the 18th century, when the Protestants came, initially the Baptists, the Lutherans. Lutherans down south in Tranquebar, when they came, and in the north the Baptists came, they set up a mission called the Serambur Mission. So they had a differential approach to caste, very interesting. The Southern Lutheran Church adopted what is called a gradualist approach to the change of caste. They said caste cannot be just thrown out like that. It will change gradually. So let us be kind of tolerant towards that, That is the Lutheran approach. But the Baptists in the north, they said, nothing doing. If you want to be a Christian, you give up caste and come. So no tolerance, zero tolerance, policy by the Baptists. Now the Anglicans, who became part and parcel of what is called the CSA, Church of South India, later on, Church of South India, they had their own approach, but in general they opposed the caste system. They would not allow, you know. So as I said, the Baptists, I would like to mention this particular incident, very interesting, that they wanted the new entrant to Christianity, or the one who desires to be baptized in Christianity, to sit on a table with others and have what is called a love feast. So this was practiced very much in Chennai, that is the southern, you know, capital. That if you want to become a Christian, you must eat with the others. You know, you must sit and eat with the others, which was not actually. The commensality is one of the issues in caste. So therefore they said you must. So that way, this particular the Protestant communion was more against, or strongly against, strongly against caste than the Catholic Church. But however, as the years and decades and centuries went by, there entered the caste division even within the Protestant circles. Now it looks as if some churches are meant for this particular community. So the Anglican Church, for example, which especially in the Chennai or Tamil Nadu context, which has majority of Dalits, they elect their own bishop, and it is generally perceived to be a church for this. After the high church disengaged itself with the local church, you know, high church meaning the British, yeah. So they disengaged when India got freedom. Even little before that, they kind of gave autonomy to the local church, and the local church became to some extent a victim of the caste system as well. So you find that, as I said, compared to the Pentecostals, they are lagging behind, but compared to the Catholics, they are little ahead. Yeah.
Okay. 了解。因为这个是一个
Do we still have time to ask questions?
asking questions.
No, no time.
有没有人？
Sorry, 我不知道还有时间，没有的话。
没有，还有时间，
Okay.
还有时间。
Thank you, Father Patrick, and it's a very inspiring talk. But I want to leave the caste problem aside. I want to ask some other theoretical questions. The one is that do you distinguish dialogue from conversation? This is the first one. And then the second one is, I like you talk about, I like the idea that you talk about that dialogue is the way of love. It's not just a methodology or anything. It's the way of love. I think it has more profound meaning because it's not only the social teaching, because the way of love, when we talk about that, it means, do you mean that because we are always in the dialogue with God no matter what? Yeah, that's our way of love, of living. Okay, our self-cultivation and everything. This is a kind of like the Christian way of living because we are always in the dialogues. Yeah, that's my question. I don't know if you mean that.
Yeah. So whether a distinction between dialogue and conversation is meaningful is a good question. Thank you. So, Raymond Panika, one of the well-known theologians who had been promoting dialogue in the Indian context, Raymond Panika, you do well to read his works, would say that dialogue needs to become more and more radical, meaning that it must open yourself up to the other in a very radical way. Otherwise, it is not dialogue. it is monologue aiming at the other. You see? So this is what is happening generally, therefore he has issue with the whole question of dialogue. Now, having said that, but he himself, improvised or improved upon the understanding of dialogue by saying that you need to do a intra-religious dialogue before inter-religious dialogue. Now, what did he mean by intra-religious dialogue? Is before you go to encounter the other, you need to, in your own self, do an internal conversation or internal dialogue with the other. You need to learn the other as the other learns his or her own tradition. You see, that is something very difficult, but you have to do it so that you can really be at the dialogical table. It is very demanding kind of exercise, but he promoted that because dialogue still was wanting. Now, the way Pope Francis and others in the Catholic social teachings have dwelt upon dialogue, especially Pope Francis, the way he has dwelt upon it, is more what we call, it's broader and wider. Dialogue not only in terms of religion, but also in economics, in politics, and things like that. They're fine. I have no issues. However, the public theologians tend to prefer the word conversation because dialogos is still kind of a logocentric, meaning a rational will to kind of, your own point to the other is there. So instead of that, open-ended, as Pope Francis himself would say, radical differences can exist, fine. So that kind of an openness, that is what we call exhibited, or that is manifest in the word conversation, which public theologians prefer. So Michael Sandel would, I think it is Michael Sandel and a few more political theories. All the names do not come to my mind. They all prefer the word conversation instead of dialogue, for the open-endedness of our narratives, that. So that is it. And then the second part of your question is
dialogue is the way of love.
Love, yes.
Of living.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Way of life, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So at that level, I think it is fine, because we have been distinguishing different layers of dialogue. One is the everyday form of dialogue that takes place in our everyday life context. In everyone's life, whether it is an ordinary person or an expert, dialogue takes place in the everyday context of life. There, I think it's fine to say that, it is more a practice of love and opening up oneself to the other, encountering the other. All those things are fine at that level. But when it comes to what we call expert centers or expert initiatives on dialogue, there all these issues of what we call how we fare in terms of being open to the other comes to play. So I think the civilization of love at the level of everyday practice of dialogue would be nurtured better. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Bishop Dimok, a quick question. Yeah. It was a good answer.
Thank you very much, Father, for the input. The civil society structure reminds me of, yes, indeed, there's that teaching of the church in relation to the role of civil society in our communities. But there was an uncovered thing which happened. The non-government organizations organize. They organize people's organizations. They deal with government. And at the end, there was he uncovered multi-billion corruption that happened. And I discovered that when listening to some civil society groups, they were discussing about livelihood and income generating things. And this, I was wondering, and I discovered that some even civil society organizations make use of church institutions, funding institutions, to access through the endorsement of some bishops. And in fact, I did not endorse a project because I noticed that it was for livelihood and income generating activity for the members of the civil society rather than the communities that they serve. So in this kind of situation, we find a hindrance to such real dialogue. Just like in India, there's the caste system, the culture. Yes. So is there also that problem regarding this kind of civil structure of income generating activity or civil structure of corruption that hinders real dialogue and progress in the community level?
Right. Yeah, very much true, especially in the context of what is called the corporate capitalism and the neoliberal capitalism. This has happened. The civil society is dominated over by people who have money power, who have political power, you know. So they undertake their own initiatives for their own comfort, with the freedom that is given in the civil society. So therefore, the question is, what guarantee is there that the civil society will certainly exhibit or manifest the Christian values or of justice and freedom and things like that? That is the question. I think it needs to be raised again and again in all our contexts, because first of all, the hope comes because civil society still has a free space wherein you can express your views, of course differentially in different places, but there is an aspect of freedom there apart from the state control and apart from the market control and things like that. Therefore we tend towards that, or we are privileged that. But however, because of the various forces which are at work in civil society, we need to consciously adopt preferential option for the least in the civil society, which Pope Francis has been repeatedly saying. So that needs to be our yardstick. If a civil society initiative is born out of a concern for the emancipation or the uplift of the lowly, then that is the civil society we would prefer. You know? Otherwise, this danger looms large, as you say. It looms large, it's everywhere in the Indian context. As you rightly said, the so-called dominant caste. One more small explanation is that, you know, the caste discourse today is not remaining at the original level of 4 castes, you know, which I mentioned, the Varnas. It has now gone into, you know, thousands of castes. So you have more than 3,000 castes, you see. Everything is endogamous, you see, they marry within themselves. So what is being discussed today is what is called the dominant caste theory. Dominant caste, meaning some castes which will become dominant politically, economically, and also socially. So their power play is very much, you know, in the public today. If you come to, you know, India and look at the election scenario, votes are being mobilized along caste lines, and the dominant castes are very much in the forefront. So that is an enemy. That is a kind of setting force that is there in the civil society. We will do well to become conscious of the need of locating ourselves in the subaltern or the lowly people's life and their emancipation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the questions on that. So please put your hands together and thank Father Patrick for the wonderful talk, and then we'll continue the conversation as he says. Yeah. Okay, we have a break.